The Borjigins were a lineage deeply rooted in Central Asian steppes. Their ancestor, Kabul Khan, had united the tribes in the early 12th century, creating a brief period of unity. After Kabul Khan's death, this union collapsed and the tribes fragmented internally, falling under the pressure of powerful neighbors such as the Tatars, Merkits, and Naimans. During this time of disarray, the Borjigins were forced to survive in small, scattered groups. It was in this turbulent period that Yesugey Bahadur was born, the son of Bartan Bahadur. In his youth, he participated in clashes against the Tatars and Merkits. His bravery and successes in battle earned him recognition within his tribe. Yet what set him apart was not only his military prowess, but also his strategic mind. Yesugey used marriage alliances as a political tool to consolidate power. He gathered nearby smaller groups under his leadership, re-establishing the Borjigins as a recognized tribe. One of Yesugey's most controversial actions was the abduction of Holan, the wife of the Merkit noble Chiledu, during a raid. This event ignited a lasting hostility between the Borjigins and the Merkits. After this forced marriage, Holan was brought to the Borjigin camp and quickly adopted to her new tribe. With her intelligence, resilience, and leadership skills, she became an important figure at Yesugey's side. In 1162, Holan gave birth to her first son, Temüjin. At the time, Yesugey was returning from a campaign during which he had killed the Tartar leader Temüjin Ugey. According to some accounts, Yesugey named his son Temüjin after the slain Tartar leader. This name fueled rumors among the steppe peoples that Temüjin was born destined for a great future. Temüjin's childhood began with a dark period following the death of his father Yesugey in 1171 after drinking sweet kumis poisoned by Tatar shamans. Yesugey's sudden death led to the disintegration of the Borjigin tribe. Authority was entirely dependent on personal power, and when that power vanished, Holan and her 7 children were abandoned. Tribe members plundered their animals, tents, and food supplies. All that remained was a small leather tent on the banks of the Onon River, a few belongings, and a handful of resilience. Holan tried to feed her children with wild roots, herbs, fish, and small animals. During the harshest winters, they were even forced to eat mouse meat. Temüjin, born 1162, at only 9 or 10 years old, learned to hunt and organized his siblings in the search for food. Around this time, he swore an Onda oath of brotherhood with Jamuka, a prince of the Jadaran clan. This bond would later lay the foundation for both an alliance and a civil war. Tensions also grew within the family. His half-brother Bektur began keeping most of the game for himself and drew the younger siblings to his side, challenging Temüjin's authority. This was not only family tension, but a crisis over who would lead in their struggle for survival. One day, as Bektur was preparing to butcher an hunted animal, Temüjin and his brother Hasar readied their bows. They fired together and killed him. Holan rebuked her sons but did not punish them, instead emphasizing during a ritual, "If leadership remains vacant, the tribe will scatter. Blood feuds will pit brother against brother." This murder solidified Temüjin's authority within the family. However, external threats were growing. The Tyachuds, old enemies of Yesugey, had begun to see Temüjin as a threat. They set up an ambush near the camp and captured him. They placed a wooden collar called a kang around his neck and held him captive for days at the edge of their camp. The Tyachud leaders planned to eliminate Yesugey's son to prevent the Borjigins from uniting again. Temüjin's escape became possible with the help of a peasant family named Sorkan Shira, who had remained loyal to Yesugey. Sorkhan Shira could not forget a favor Yasuge had done for him during his lifetime. According to steppe law, the protection and support offered by a leader was considered a lifelong debt. Moreover, Mongol custom regarded helping someone in desperate need as a sacred duty. Sorkhan Shira was impressed by Temüjin's patience and determination during his captivity, despite his young age. He sensed that Temüjin might one day become a great leader. Despite the risk of retaliation from the Tyachudes, Sorkhan Shira and his family did not hesitate. Under cover of night, they loosened and removed Temüjin's collar. The family members kept watch and provided food and water. Temüjin, hiding for days, managed to return to his family without the Tyachudes realizing. After his escape, Temüjin began making plans not only for survival, but also to establish a small leadership structure. A few of Yasuge's loyal men who had survived gathered around Temüjin, impressed by his just and disciplined approach. Jelme and Bororchu became the most loyal and courageous members of this group. Temüjin ensured fairness in food distribution, turned hunting parties into patrols, and placed sentries around the camp. He set punishments for those who broke discipline, maintaining order within the group. This small but determined band gradually became a growing threat to the surrounding tribes. The Merkits were waiting for an opportunity to avenge Houlan's abduction, while the Taichiodes launched minor raids to prevent Temüjin from regaining strength. These increasing threats taught Temüjin that military power alone was not enough. Houlan often reminded her son of the importance of political alliances. Her advice led Temüjin to revisit the Angurat betrothal agreement arranged by his father during his lifetime. At the age of 16, Temüjin understood that marriage to Bororte would provide his small group with political protection and economic support. This marriage would become one of the most strategic steps on his path to leadership. By the time Temüjin turned 16, he was no longer just a young man struggling to survive, but a budding leader who had begun forming his own circle of loyalty in the harsh conditions of the steppe. However, his group was still fragile. Enemies such as the Merkits and Taichiodes were watching for any opportunity to halt his rise. For this reason, Temüjin decided to put into effect the betrothal agreement his father Yasuge had arranged with the Angurat tribe during his lifetime. The Angurats, though not one of the largest tribes on the steppe, were a regional power thanks to Dai Sichem's stable leadership and extensive trade connections. For Temüjin, this marriage would provide not only a wife, but also a political alliance and an economic shield. Temüjin, under the guidance of his mother Hoelun, set out with his small group toward Onjirat lands. Throughout the journey, he led his followers with military discipline, posting sentries, placing guards, and staying prepared for sudden attacks. This disciplined approach demonstrated that his leadership abilities had grown beyond merely managing a family group. When they arrived at the Onjirat camp, Dai Sichen welcomed them warmly. However, the decision was not unanimously accepted within the tribe. Some Onjirat elders expressed doubts about the benefits of such a union, questioning, would an alliance with a young and impoverished leader bring risks to the Onjirats? Yet Dai Sichen, mindful of Yasuge's past friendship and impressed by Temüjin's determination despite his youth, gave his approval for the marriage. Borte joined Temüjin's camp not only as a wife, but also as a strategic partner. With her intelligence and strong will, she quickly became one of the people Temüjin consulted in his decisions. She earned respect among the women of the camp, playing an active role in logistics, food distribution, and managing relations between families. Her influence became a symbol of stability for newly joined families. Borte's dowry significantly increased Temüjin's economic strength. 10 horses, 20 cattle, dozens of sheep and goats, several servants, and a caravan loaded with valuable fabrics. These resources bolstered the small group's defensive capacity and turned Temüjin's camp into an attractive refuge for neighboring minor tribes. Temüjin used this economic power strategically. He rewarded new warriors with shares of the herds, solidifying their loyalty. The white silk coat gifted by Dai Sechin became a symbol of this chain of loyalty. The first to receive pieces of the coat were his most loyal men, Jelme and Borchu. This reward system laid the foundation for a new culture in Temüjin's camp, one in which loyalty was highly valued and individual status was determined by devotion. The marriage caused ripples in the balance of power on the steppe. The Merkits, still shamed by Hoyland's abduction and now viewing Temüjin's growing power as a direct threat, began to see the Ongarat alliance as a political shield for his group and an obstacle to their control over trade routes. As a result, they started planning a raid against Temüjin. The Taiyichiuds, on the other hand, chose indirect methods instead of targeting Temüjin's new alliance outright. They sent agents to entice neighboring minor tribes and spread rumors, aiming to weaken the circle of loyalty around him. Among the smaller tribes, reactions varied. Some, impressed by Temüjin's just leadership, organized camp structure, and growing prosperity, joined voluntarily. Notably, several small groups weary of Tartar oppression stood out among the newcomers. Others, however, grew uneasy about Temüjin's rapidly expanding power and allied themselves with the Taiyichiuds to secure their own safety. With Borte's arrival, Temüjin further strengthened the internal order of the camp. Hunting parties were turned into patrols. Servants organized into a logistical support network. New yurts were erected and sentries posted around the perimeter. Temüjin was no longer merely a young man struggling to survive. He was now a leader whose name was increasingly spoken across the steppe. But the Merkits were determined to halt Temüjin's rise. This set in motion a chain of events that would lead to Borte's abduction and Temüjin's first major military trial on his path to leadership. Borte's arrival in Temüjin's camp was not merely a family union for the Borjigins. It was also a display of strength for the surrounding tribes. However, this show of power had the opposite effect on old enemies. The Merkits, in particular, had not forgotten the humiliation of Hoyland's abduction from Chiledu years earlier. Now seeing Hoyland's son Temüjin gaining strength through alliances rekindled a wave of anger among Merkit leaders. Toktoa Beki, the Merkit leader, viewed the situation as an insult to his tribe's honor. Yet the plan for a raid initially sparked debate among the Merkit elders. Some older leaders foresaw that Temüjin might form powerful alliances with tribes like the Ongirats and Kerites, warning that a direct attack could be risky. Younger warriors, and Toktoa Beki's son, however, believed the shame brought by Hoyland's abduction could only be erased through a bold act of revenge. Ultimately, for the Merkits, this raid was determined to be not merely a military operation, but an effort to restore tribal honor. The Merkits, with the covert support of the Taiyichiuds, planned their attack. The Taiyichiud leaders avoided direct involvement in the conflict. Instead, they preferred to wait for the Merkits to weaken Temüjin. This strategy offered a perfect opportunity to curb Temüjin's rise without risking their own warriors and to later bring the weakened sides under their control. The Merkits launched a sudden night raid. Temüjin's camp was not yet fully prepared for defense. During the surprise attack, the warriors were not gathered in the camp. Hunting parties and patrols were scattered. This lack of readiness gave the Merkits a decisive advantage. Borte's abduction was not only a personal loss for Temüjin, but also the first major test of his leadership. Morale in the camp plummeted. Some believed that fighting the Merkits directly would be suicidal. Temüjin, however, refused to accept the loss. His mother, Hoelun, guided him with these words: "A leader's strength is measured not only by arrows and swords, but by the alliances he weaves around himself. If your enemies have unity, your unity must be greater." These words led Temüjin to seek not only a military, but also a diplomatic solution. He sent an envoy to Togrul Khan, leader of the Karets. Remembering how Yasuge had once saved his life, Togrul Khan agreed to help. For the Karets, this was also an opportunity to build a new bridge of friendship with Temüjin. Jamuka, meanwhile, chose to stand by Temüjin, both to observe his rise closely and to maintain a balance in their potential future rivalry for leadership. Thus, a coalition army of about 20,000 men formed around Temüjin. Temüjin used classic steppe tactics in his counterattack: encirclement with fast cavalry and a sudden night assault on the enemy camp. Jalme and Boorchu led the charge bravely, emerging as heroes within Temüjin's circle of loyalty. The Merkits were unable to withstand Temüjin's speed and determination. Their camp was plundered, and the captives were freed. Borte had spent several months in Merkit captivity. Although she had been given to Toktoabeki's son, no actual marriage had taken place between them. When she was rescued, she returned to Temüjin's camp and was once again accepted as his wife. However, this episode led to persistent rumors across the steppe about her pregnancy at the time and questions over the paternity of her first son, Jochi. The defeat of the Merkits increased Temüjin's respect among the smaller tribes. Groups that had previously remained neutral now joined his camp. Tribes under Taichud influence, however, became even more cautious. This victory created a new balance of power on the steppe and accelerated the growth of his chain of loyalty. Rumors about Jochi's paternity began to circulate as whispers within the camp. Some warriors struggled to accept Jochi, but Temüjin took a firm stance. "He is my son. Whoever questions him questions their own loyalty." This resolute position reinforced his authority and silenced doubts within the camp. After the defeat of the Merkits and Borte's rescue, morale in Temüjin's camp rose. However, this victory was not yet enough to place him among the great powers of the steppe. Temüjin's circle of loyalty was only just beginning to grow beyond a small family group. That year became a period of rebuilding for Temüjin. The herds and servants from Borte's dowry provided economic stability. The first expansion of the loyalty chain took place. Several small tribes joined his camp, trusting in his just leadership. Yet the Taichiuds and remnants of the Merkits continued to linger as threats in the surrounding area. Temüjin began training his groups and strengthening camp discipline. Temüjin and Jamuka, as two young leaders of the steppe, united their forces. Together they commanded a force of 20,000 men. This alliance became a beacon of hope for the smaller tribes seeking stability on the steppe. Joint raids were carried out. Tartar raiders were driven back in the eastern steppe. Small-scale attacks were launched against remnants of the Merkits. These campaigns were not major victories, but rather opportunities for Temüjin and Jamuka to test their armies and instill discipline in their warriors. This period also marked the years when the chain of loyalty was solidified. Temüjin strengthened internal allegiance by expanding the distribution of white silk coat rewards. Jamuka, meanwhile, maintained the traditional Mongol style of leadership on his side. You dance away. Temüjin began developing a governance system called yasa laws in his camp for the first time. He acted as an arbiter in disputes between smaller tribes. As a result, he was seen not only as a military leader, but also as a judge and order maker. Alliances with the Karaite and Ongirat tribes were strengthened. These diplomatic relations provided Temüjin not only military but also commercial advantages. Trade in silk, iron, and furs began in his camp. When Temüjin's circle of loyal followers reached 20,000, he was proclaimed Khan by his own people. This proclamation created a power imbalance in the steppe. Although Jamuka still appeared to be his ally, the growing allegiance of smaller tribes to Temüjin was weakening their relationship. This year also marked the beginning of indirect contact with the Jin dynasty, China. The Chinese silently observed Temüjin's rise against the Tartar tribes and occasionally sent diplomatic signals through merchant caravans.
Like falling rain.
The tension between Temüjin and Jamuka had become evident. Temüjin's proclamation as Khan led to an influx of smaller tribes rallying to his side. This development unsettled Jamuka, who accused Temüjin of being a young leader defying tradition. Jamuka gathered an army of 30,000 and decided to march against Temüjin. This decision paved the way for the Battle of Dalan Baljut. Temüjin, with a loyal following of 20,000, had to confront Jamuka's forces.
But my soul still.
Jamuka viewed Temüjin's proclamation as Khan as a betrayal. To him, Temüjin was a young upstart disrupting the traditional leadership order of the steppe. Temüjin's assertion that authority over tribes could be built through loyalty rather than noble birthright unsettled Jamuka. Jamuka declared himself the guardian of traditions, conveying this to the steppe's elders as follows: Temüjin is swift but rootless. The Borjigin leadership comes not from blood, but through games of loyalty. Mongol customs stem from lineage, not allegiance. This rhetoric resonated, particularly among aristocratic tribes. Some of the Ongurats, Tatars, Taichuts, and Dorbans swore allegiance to Jamuka. These tribes formed the core of an alliance that amassed an army of 30,000 warriors. With this force, Jamuka planned to eradicate Temüjin from the steppe and restore the traditional tribal order. During military preparations, he organized his army into 3 large divisions, each led by a trusted cousin or loyal chieftain. However, there were minor tensions within the alliance. Some tribes admired Temüjin's equitable approach to sharing resources and began questioning Jamuka's tradition-bound, nobility-centered leadership. Nevertheless, Jamuka's charisma and military experience persuaded them to join this great confrontation.
Speaks your name.
Jamuka's preparations posed a great threat to Temüjin. His circle of loyalty consisted of about 20,000 people, yet in the camp, fear and hope coexisted. Moorte organized among the women to boost morale in the camp. Hoelen, on the other hand, gave encouraging speeches to the young warriors. The tribes on Temüjin's side were as follows: a group from the Karaites, the pro-Temüjin faction of the Ongirat, and several small tribes. In return for their loyalty, these tribes were promised equal sharing, rights to plunder, and protection from attacks. Temüjin put his army under strict military discipline. He set clear rules for all warriors. Those who betray in battle will be executed. Those who show courage will be rewarded. The Mongol people follow the brave, not the cowardly. These words were often repeated in the camp, reinforcing the chain of loyalty. Loyal generals like Gelme and Boorchu were responsible for training the new soldiers. Temüjin's leadership was strengthened by his promise to build a system based on merit rather than tradition. Merchants from areas near the Chinese border brought small quantities of iron and silk to Temüjin's camp. These materials were used for making weapons and equipping horses. However, Temujin's army was still smaller and weaker than Jamuka's.
Your footsteps echo.
Comparison of the two leaders' strategies. The strategies employed by Jamuka and Temujin in the upcoming conflict reflected not only their leadership philosophies, but also the structures of their armies. Jamuka had assembled a massive force of 30,000 warriors. This numerical superiority gave him the confidence to maneuver freely across the steppe. His leadership was rooted in lineage and tradition. This aristocratic model drew support from established clans like the Taichut, Tatar, and Dorban. Jamuka's motivation was to preserve the age-old traditions of the steppe and defend the natural rights of noble bloodlines. However, this system's weak point was the presence of nobles within the alliance who often engaged in internal power struggles. Such internal opposition occasionally caused friction in the army's decision-making processes. Temujin, on the other hand, operated with a smaller force of about 20,000 warriors. His leadership philosophy prioritized merit and loyalty over noble lineage. Some Karites and the pro-Temujin faction of the Ungurot joined him, trusting in this new order. Temujin's motivation was to establish a system of equality and justice on the steppe. Yet his army also faced weaknesses. Numerical inferiority and the inexperience of many newly joined warriors posed significant disadvantages.
And wouldn't know.
In the summer of 1187, the two armies began to face each other in the Dalan Baljut region. A heavy silence hung over the steppe. Reconnaissance units from both sides kept a close watch on one another, engaging in minor skirmishes to gain dominance over the terrain. Temujin, despite having fewer troops, sought to gain an advantage through superior maneuverability. Jamuka, on the other hand, relied on his numerically superior army and planned to use direct encirclement and overwhelming force. On the wind-swept steppe plains of Dalan Baljut, Temujin and Jamuka's armies were arranged in long lines, observing each other intently. Both leaders were carefully assessing the intelligence brought back by their reconnaissance units. To compensate for his numerical disadvantage, Temujin devised a battle plan based on rapid maneuvers. He divided his cavalry into small groups, which would launch swift attacks against the flanks of Jamuka's army and then retreat. His objective was to disrupt the enemy's formation. Jamuka, meanwhile, relied on classic steppe tactics, a large central force, two powerful wings, and heavy cavalry forming an encirclement line. Confident in his army's superior numbers, he planned to rout Temujin's forces with a direct and overwhelming assault. On the morning of the battle, Temujin's vanguard units launched sudden attacks, causing confusion on Jamuka's right flank. These groups, led by Jaume and Borchu, harassed the enemy's forward outposts before retreating. However, this tactic was quickly countered by Jamuka's experienced commanders. Jamuka repositioned his forces to protect his flanks without weakening his central strength. The sound of galloping hooves and war cries echoed across the steppe, turning into hours of minor skirmishes. Neither side suffered heavy losses. However, Temujin's army lacked the strength for a prolonged conflict. In the afternoon, Jamuka launched a direct assault at the head of his central forces. The weight of his 30,000-strong army crashed down like a wave on Temujin's smaller units. Temujin's warriors, hindered by some indisciplined new recruits, were forced to retreat. At this point, Temujin himself mounted his horse and rode to the center of his army, trying to raise the morale of his fighters. However, the numerical disadvantage, inexperience, and fatigue began to cause cracks in the ranks of Temujin's forces. As the battle neared its end, Temujin gave the order to retreat. The strongest links in his chain of loyalty tried to make the withdrawal orderly while protecting their leader. Yet Jamuka's vanguard units caught and destroyed groups that broke away from Temujin's army. The most tragic incident occurred when 70 young warriors who had separated from Temujin's forces fell into Jamuka's hands. As an example to others, Jamuka had them brutally executed. The skins of the 70 youths were flayed and thrown into boiling cauldrons. This event became known across the steppe as the Cauldron Massacre and left a deep wound in Temujin's camp. The defeat at Dalan Baljut was the first major fracture in Temujin's leadership. He had lost a large portion of his army, and many smaller tribes switched allegiances once again. Yet the core of his chain of loyalty, the family circle led by Gelme, Borchu, and Borte, remained steadfastly by his side. This loss hardened Temujin's approach to leadership. A leader who doubts loyalty is doomed to fail. Loyalty will be rewarded. Treachery will be eradicated at its root. On the blood-soaked steppe of Dalan Baljut, 70 young warriors fell victim to Jamuka's wrath. Temujin tasted his first major defeat, but this was only the beginning. The fires of the steppe were just starting to blaze. On that thin line between loyalty and betrayal, victory and defeat, a leader was about to be reborn. In the next episode, you'll witness how Temujin rose from the ashes and began uniting the steppe with an iron fist. Don't forget to subscribe and don't miss part 2. This story is only getting started.